Will India's batting style in Test cricket be a problem for us and cause us to lose the BGT after 10 years?
Now, there's been a lot of criticism towards Rohit Sharma and the Indian team because of the way we've been batting. Rohit Sharma's press conference after the third Test match against New Zealand, he said that things look good when it comes off, but when it doesn't, it does not look good. The problem with that is you're playing a Test match, and if you lose out in the first start, then you're playing catch up for the next 4 days. And that is essentially the criticism towards Rohit Sharma and the Indian team. But now that we are going to Australia, is this really a problem?
We looked at India's numbers in Test matches over the last 3 years, and for each year, we looked at the average runs per over and also the overs that they would face on average in an innings. Now, for 2022, India has played an average of 78.5 overs every innings, and they've scored at a run rate of 3.72. Whereas in 2023, that number improves a bit, where India is playing about 82 overs every innings, but their scoring rate has come down a bit, which is at 3.36 runs per over. And when we come to 2024, the average overs per innings drops once again. It goes to 70.3 overs every innings, but the run rate has gone up significantly. It's gone from 3.36 to 3.87. And one obvious factor that has contributed to this change in run rate from 23 to 24 is the fact that the Indian batting lineup is much more attacking now. 2023 was the year where Jaiswal made his debut, and we all know how attacking a batsman he is. In fact, his career strike rate has only gone higher and higher across series. Jaiswal currently has a career strike rate of 70.14, which is almost unheard of in Test cricket. And while Rohit Sharma has always been attacking, just the fact that Jaiswal is also attacking means India's scoring rate in the first few overs is definitely higher than what it used to be. Not only that, Rishabh Pant also returned to the Test squad after his freak injury, and you also have Sarfaraz Khan now in the squad. And in general, the entire batting lineup is just so much more attacking right now. And this is the obvious reason for why India's scoring rate has gone up so much from 2023 to 2024.
Before we get into the Border Gavaskar Trophy and what we need to do to win the Border Gavaskar Trophy, hit the subscribe button. Now, there's something to keep in mind, right? There's a difference in the way India bats as compared to the last two BGTs that we have won in Australia. And this can also be shown in numbers, right? In the last two BGTs per innings, we have faced about 95.2 overs. And in the last 3 years, on average, we haven't been able to bat 90 overs per innings. And this has nothing to do with India per se, but this is just how Test cricket has evolved and how fast-paced it has become. Now, the main two culprits for why we were able to bat long in Australia in the last two series, because we had someone like a Pujara in the last two series and someone like a Vihari in the 2021 series, and what they did was they played time. They held up one end while the stroke players on the other end, someone like a Virat Kohli or a Rahane, would be able to score runs freely. While Pujara and Vihari played time, they took their time to score runs. They did score runs, but they made sure they wore the bowlers down. Now, the evidence is in the numbers, right? In the last two BGTs, we played about 95.2 overs with a run rate per over of 2.8, but in the last 3 years, India have been only able to play 77.2 overs per innings with a run rate of 3.65, which is a significant jump. Of course, conditions and all differ, but it only goes to show how attacking India has become in Test matches.
Talking about the current BGT and what India needs to do to win based on the historical data that we have from the last two BGTs, the first thing that India needs to keep in mind is that they need to be able to score at least 508 runs in a Test match. Now, in the 8 Test matches that India played across the two Border Gavaskar trophies, there were 5 such instances where India won or drew the Test match when they were able to score 500 runs or more in the Test match itself. And as compared to the last two BGTs that had 4 Test matches each, another factor that comes in this time is that we have 5 Test matches across 5 great Test venues, and it's important to look at the average first inning scores across each of these venues. The first venue being Perth, this has the highest average first inning score, which is at 457. Coming to Adelaide, that's going to be the day-night Test match, this number goes down slightly to 412, and when you come to Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney, this number slips to the early 300s. Now, this only goes to show the fact that all of these pitches are fairly good to bat on, especially in the first inning. So, firstly, winning the toss is going to be extremely important, and choosing to bat first is going to be a given. And this is why it's also going to be important not only to win the toss, but also to be able to score big runs in the first innings. Now, before we get any further into this video, into the nitty-gritties, it's also important to understand that the bowling lineups that India had in 2018-19 especially, and also 2021 were extremely capable. They did really well. They were able to pick 20 wickets consistently, and that's the reason why India also won those BGTs. Now, if you want us to make a detailed video on that as well, on the bowlers, Comment down below.
It's one thing to look at all of these numbers and try understanding what it all means, but what we have tried to do is put all of these numbers in a match simulation and play out a match and see what India needs to do to get over the line against a team like Australia in Australia. Now, there's something really important to keep in mind. Because this is a match simulation, we have kept few assumptions in mind that will stay constant throughout. The first assumption is that the first innings average runs scored would be around 365, and we have come to this number by finding out the average of all first innings scores of the ground that we're playing at. The second assumption is, of course, that the Indian batters will do fairly well because of the style of play India is going at the moment. They love pace and bounce coming onto the bat, and most of the batters in the current batting lineup like to play the ball on the up, which would only mean that these kind of pitches would aid them. The last assumption is that because we don't have an accumulator like a Pujara or a Vihari, we will score those runs except at a higher strike rate, which also means that we will be batting lesser number of overs. Now, before we get into the match simulation itself, something you need to realize that this is a very ideal and a perfect scenario if everything goes to plan.
Of course, we are building out this simulation to consider the fact that India will win this test match, and which is why we are also going to give ideal conditions for India to work with. First thing being India winning the toss and choosing to bat first in any of these grounds. And now we looked at the historical data for test matches played in Australia since 2018. From that, we looked at teams that batted first and won or drew test matches, based on which India will be scoring 428 in the first innings in 117.3 overs at their average run rate over the last 3 years, which is 3.6. Now, Australia comes out to bat in the second innings, and based on all the data we have from 2018, if India were to get the upper hand in this test match, then Australia would have to get all out for 238 in about 66 overs, again based on their average run rate over the last 3 years. Now, we arrived at this number by looking at the historical data of teams that batted second and went on to lose test matches in Australia. And this means that India will go on to have a lead of 190 after the end of the first innings of both teams. Now, this ties in with a very interesting insight, which is based on the historical data from the last 2 BGTs. Whenever India has batted first and gone on to win or draw a test match, their average score has been 438, which is above the average score of 428 that India would ideally have to score in the first innings of the match simulation. And lastly, of course, if your team gets a 190 lead in the first innings, you would back them to go on and win test matches.
Now, of course, you can't always win the toss and bat first. There are times when you will lose the toss, and teams have won batting second in Australia. Now, this time around, when Australia comes out to bat, according to the historical data since 2018, when teams have batted first in Australia and lost, we will need to restrict them to 282, and then India comes on to bat and shows a dominant form and scores 367. Here again, this is the average score of teams batting second and winning in Australia. Now, Australia comes out to bat trailing by just 85 runs. Now, of course, this is not a lot, which also shows that not a lot of teams have won batting second in Australia. Since 2018, teams have won 58% of the time batting first, which is not a lot, but in a test match in Australia, you would ideally like to win the toss and bat first all the time. Interestingly, the average score of India batting second and winning in Australia is 302, which is a lot less than what they ideally would like to score, which is 367. And this is because the Indian bowling lineup was just so good that they didn't need the batters to score a lot of runs.
Now, of course, this match simulation was the ideal scenario, but things to keep in mind are that India needs to score at least 508 runs in a match for them to have a good chance to win a test match in Australia. Apart from that, one thing to note is that the team right now is very different from the last 2 teams that went to the Border Gavaskar Trophy in Australia. We have a lot of youngsters in the side, the batting style is extremely different, and more importantly, when we focus on the bowling, the only thing that's been constant across the last 2 tours is Jasprit Bumrah. He, of course, is going to be the spearhead of the attack, and we expect a lot from him. But apart from that, when you look at the pace attack, Prasidh Krishna is a new customer. Mohammad Siraj is not in great form. Of course, he did decently the last time he played the BGT, but he's been a little rough off late. Akashdeep too is flying to Australia for the very first time. And another major point for concern is that India are going to be missing Mohammad Shami, someone who's done extremely well in Australia. In fact, at the first test venue, which is at the Perth Stadium, Mohammad Shami has the best figures by an Indian bowler. And coming to the batters' form, you of course don't have Pujara and Rahane anymore. Virat Kohli is struggling. He scored a lot of runs in Australia, but the current psyche is something that's definitely going to matter for him. Apart from that, Rohit Sharma too has not been amongst the runs in his last 10 or so innings. We have a lot of youngsters who are first timers in the form of Jaiswal, Dhruv Jurel, and also Sarfaraz Khan. KL Rahul too is another customer who has an extremely poor record in Australia, and he too has not been amongst the runs of late. And because of all these factors, it's going to be extremely important for not only the Indian team but also the management to reflect on their style of batting, the Rohit Sharma approach to batting, and whether or not it's going to work this time in the Border Gavaskar Trophy or not.
Now, this has been a video on what what the batters need to do to win in Australia. If you guys want a detailed bowler-centric video, comment down below. Like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching. We put out videos every Mondays, Tuesdays and Friday. All of our links are in the description below. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter. We also have a blog, and if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, do that too. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.